We're getting close to a festival of Pesach, and we're about to study page 7 in Tractate עירובין. The last subject we discussed is the idea of En Mashgichin Bevat Kol. The rabbis feel very strongly that one should not go in leniency in the extreme way or the stringency in the extreme way. Meaning, in the past end of the session discussion, which for those who didn't get a chance to watch or been there, just make sure that we put together the pieces. The rabbi said you cannot take advantage of the system, or you cannot be too strong or too strict when there's no need. So we have the school of Beit Shammai and the school of Beit Hillel. So there are those who start feeling, okay, I'll go with Beit Shammai totally or Beit Hillel totally. It's like the fellow came and he said, okay, Rabbi, I'm Ashkenazi, but when it's come to Pesach, I'm Sephardi. What do you mean by that? I'm not going to observe. Kitniot. Shaving on a Sephira. Okay, so I'm going to shave up to Rosh Chodesh, and then I'm going to shave for Lag BaOmer, etc. So you cannot go, in a sense, to the extreme in either way.
Well,
in a sense,
can I ask a question on that? Because I thought about this basically from studying the previous stuff, and we aren't supposed to accept, the stringencies of one and the stringencies of the other, to be too stringent. But I mean, for doing it personally for yourself, is that a problem, or is it a problem of essentially teaching others that this is the halakha?
It's a good point. Moshe Feinstein said that there are several different categories of stringencies. There is a concept that it's called chumra pratit, that the person just took upon himself something, and there is something that is a community, that is a community accept upon themselves something. So Moshe Feinstein said that a personal chumra you cannot impose on anyone else,
right.
And in general the rabbi is not for this type of. My Rebbe used to say, if you want to be strict with lashon hara. Be strict with treating other people. This area you should be very strict. But furthermore, it's in a sense, it's like a feeling of tribal. In the election period, you remember that there are people who, no matter what, they are Republican, no matter what, they are Democrat. And no matter what their people or their person does, it has to be the right thing.
Right.
So we don't hold that in Judaism. And that's the discussion here. You have to go, that's the final word. We said here, Rabbi Yoshua, the lo mashgach bevat kol, that's top of page 7, which means there's a famous Gemara in Tractate Bava Metzia, page 59b, famous story of Tanuro shel Chachinai, the Achnai. So there's a story of the stove. I assume that most of the people who reach this page in Eiruvin know the story, but in short, it was a disputation between the rabbis, and it was one rabbi that stood up and said, I can prove it to you, and all of a sudden the building starts shaking, there's water coming out, etc., etc. And Rabbi Yeshua stood up and he said, the Torah said in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, Lo b'shamayim, is not in heaven. And therefore, we go by the majority, Acharei Rabim lehatot. We go by the law of the majority, and that's it. We don't depend upon, something from heaven. We're getting close to Pesach. It reminds me, just a side note before we start our studies, it's one of those stories I heard about Rabbi Pepperman. Rabbi Pepperman was the chaplain of U.S. Army for many, many years. And once in those years when the U.S. invaded Italy, and it was the General Clark who was the general who in charge, so Rabbi Pepperman came to that general and he said, in a couple of months is the festival of Passover, and we need to celebrate it, and we want to make a Seder. And General Clark said, oh, that's awesome, let's do it. He says, it's not going to come from heaven, the matzahs, we need to have matzahs. So just, the story is a very interesting story. So the General Clark said, okay, so what do you want to do? Let's call the the marshal, the one who's marshal chief, the one who's making the food, says, no, we make a order from the headquarters in New York. They're going to ship us matzahs. How many soldiers? They estimate about 10,000 Jewish soldiers. So they're planning to have like 10,000 pounds shipped from. So fine. So Rabbi Pepperman came back and he said, it's already getting close to Passover and I don't see any sign of shipment. What do you think we should do? It's not in heaven and I want to make a big Seder and they're planning to call upon all the Jewish boys and the couple of thousand people. So to make it short, he called this general in charge of cooking. It was an Italian-American general. And he said to him, we want to have a Seder, General Clark said to him, and this is the chaplain, Pepperman. And what do you think we should do? He says, you give me an order and I'll make it. It's not a problem. So all of a sudden, he started baking and he baked like 10,000 pounds of matzahs. And a couple of days before Yom Tov, the Manischevis or whatever it is, the shipment received with all the matzahs from New York. So they have that huge Seder, one of the biggest ever. And according to that record, it was like close to 6,000 people. All the U.S. generals were in that Seder. They have for sure a lot of matzahs from both resources. But the interesting part is that general tastes the Manishevet or whatever, the New York shipping matzah. And he said, mine is much better. Anyway, so we said here in page 7a, that Rabbi Yoshua hold that we don't go by the bat kol, we don't go by the voice of heaven. And one time I heard it from one of my early chavrusa, and right after the service I used to have a chavrusa, a great rabbi, may rest in peace, his name is Rabbi Nisim Yagen, used to have a yeshiva in Yerushalayim, and we studied together. So one time one of his students asked him about bat kol. He said, there's so many texts that speaking about voice from heaven. I never heard such a thing. So Rav Yagen said to him, you have just to listen carefully to what's going on in your life, when everyone's life. Because there's a lot of signals, there's a lot of messages, you just don't really pay attention, and that's the bat kol nowadays. Anyway, Rav Yoshua said that we don't pasken halacha, we don't rule by the bat kol. Ibai tema, another way to see it, hachei ke'amar. That's now we apply to all different disputation between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. That kol echad mashkach trei Tanai vetrei Amorai, the plige ba'adat deken machloket Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. When we have a disputation between two Tanaim or two Amoraim, Tanaim it's in general the 2nd, 3rd century, Amoraim is the Talmudic time, the 4th and 5th century. So when you have this disputation that very similar to Ke'ein Machloket Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, the same as the disputation between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, Lo le'eved kikule mar v'chikule mar. You don't go by leniency in both ways. V'lo kechumre demar kechumre. You don't go to the extreme to be stringent. Ela, rather, or kikule demar kechumre avid, or kikule demar kechumre avir. So as long as you don't have the final halacha, a person should stick with one way, with one school of teaching. But otherwise, it's called in the language ksil. That's the Rashi used the term that the Gemara said it in the previous page. Ksil meaning someone who's full. Makes no sense. Mikol makom kashya. So if you tell me that you should not go stringent in both places, what we said? We talked yesterday about the people of the city of Nahada, city of Jewish learning in Babylon, that they said if you have a curvy mavoi, which means that it's come as a L, it's a letter L, so they go in stringencies in both, in Rav and Shmuel. So now is a still problem. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak kulei kerav avdua. He said that we go all by the story of the sages of Nahada, with dealing with the curving alleyway. We go according to the Rav, and we're not going by Shmuel that said that you need to have doors to close it. But you go by the Rav that you have to put the two stringency. דאמר רב הונא אמר רב, הלכה ואין מורים כן. He said that even that is a public ruling is not issue to that effect lechatchila, which means that in the essence of halacha, that's correct. But halacha lemaaseh, which means in a practical halacha, we don't do that. Usually, you go when you see a disputation, and just give you a general ruling, the Gemara said in Avodah Zarah, that you go by the greatest rabbi. If, for example, you have, I'll just give you a name for the sake of understanding, you have halacha by a giant rabbi, like in the past generation, let's say Rabbi Feinstein, or Rav Eliashiv, or in that giant, and you have others, you go by the highest. That's number one. Now, in general, if it's the issue of the oraita, biblical, you go stringent. If it's rabbinic, you have a room to go lenient. What happened if these contradiction each other? Which means, let's say Rabbi A said that today is Yom Tov. Rabbi B said that tomorrow it's Yom Tov, and today is a secular day. Now you have a problem, because it means that one day you are in violation, and you cannot go and say that you observe 2 days because two rabbis said at different days. So therefore, most of the Rishonim, Ramban, Rishba, others, said that you stick with their way. So, for example, those who go by the Rif and the Rambam, so they staying even in it's come to leniency. You go that way. So we talked earlier about Kitniot and Pesach. Sephardim go by the Sephardim. Not every Sephardi, by the way, observe it. But let's say they go by the Sephardim, so they go also lenient in that area. By the way, it's a common mistake. The Sephardim have many halachot that they are more stringent than Ashkenazim. Right. It's just happened in the Kitniot. But anyway, the whole idea of halacha and morim ken, that's a very important concept that we should know, not only in a sense of learning, but also in a practical halacha. Halacha and morim ken meaning that the rabbis experience people who are not educated, people who are not appreciate enough the Torah, and they see any corner and they try to cut those corners. The rabbi sees the tendency of people belittle the Torah, so they put those fences in order to avoid any type of denigration of Torah, to strengthen the observant the Torah properly. So that's always we go halacha and morimkin, which means yes, speaking strictly by the dry law, it can be fine, but you don't rule it because people misconstrue it, and then they can enter the domain of violations. Now, with that in mind, so how it's applied here? That we are more stringency, that we require like Hanania, who said that we have to have doors. So it means that even according to Rav, you have to have doors. That's exactly what the sages of Nahada said, regardless if that Mavoy is Lamed or not. So let's continue with the pictures. I just want to make sure that we are all at the same page and understand. So we talked yesterday about situation like that. Is that picture clear on over there? Okay. So you see here, this is L, and people come in and out. So he said you need to have those doors, and we basically, Hanania said that according to Beit Shammai, those doors needs to be locked each and every time. Why you need to do that? It's because this is Reshut HaRabim, this is public domain, this is private domain. You need to make sure that people separate clearly, and by placing doors and locking them, you show that it's separate. Okay? So he said, so regardless if this a mavoy mefulash or mavoy lo mefulash, remember mavoy mefulash is regardless if it's made like that or it's a make in this way, Either it's made this way or it's made this way. Okay? Regardless to that, he said you have to have a door. ולרב עדה בר אהבה אמר רב דאמר הלכה ומורים כן מה יקרא למימר. He said that you have to be more lenient in a sense that if it's a מבוי מפולש you can depend upon צורת הפתח and it's enough. In other words, what is a צורת הפתח? You put a post here, you put a cross beam and two posts in both sides, and you don't need to bother with doors, and that's more lenient. So how we explain what the sages of Nahardea said, that they are more stringent according to Rav and Shmuel, against those Braito that said that you should be more stringent the way that they hold these stringencies. Amar Rav Shizvi ki lo avdinan kechumrei deveitrei. When we don't do stringencies in both ways, heicha de satrea dade. That's apply only, as we said, that one contradicted the others. Alright? You said it's today, Yantev. The other one said it's tomorrow, Yantev. So one contradicts the other. So that's one who's stringent in one place, he need to be lenient in the other place. So, Kegon. Here is giving us example, and it looks like we're digressing, but we are not digressing. We are bringing an example not only to juxtapose, but also to strengthen the opinion. So now we're going to a different location, which is a Mishnah. The Mishnah Tractate Aholot, chapter 2, Mishnah 3, said as follows. The Mishnah dealing with Shidra and Gulgolet, a spine and a skull. What does that mean? They're dealing with a dead body. You have a dead body, and he said, Hashidra ve'agulgolet shechasru. So if it turns that it's incomplete, you have the corpse, and in the corpse you have the spine, and you have the scalp of the corpse that is incomplete. So what happened here? There are two different entities, and it's important to understand it. One, it's called Tum'at Maga. You remember we discussed Tum'at Maga? Tum'at Maga meaning someone touched a dead body. There is another concept that it's not necessarily by touching something, but is just Tum'at Ohel, which means that not by touching it, by just being under that roof. And then is a category that is called Tum'at Masa. What is Tum'at Masa? If you carry it. So now is the issue. If the dead body is not complete, which means it's missing part, it's missing the scalp, it's missing the spine, etc. If the skull or the spine missing, he said it's not carry this impurity. Okay, the 10th impurity. Why? They said vekama, and how much? Because here again, it's not touching a full corpse. So they said, what's the measurement? They said kama chesaron shebashidra. How much need to be considered a deficiency in a spine for this purpose? So they said, Bet Shammai omrim shtei chuliyot. Bet Shammai said, if it is missing two vertebrae. So if you have in that sense, so then it's already not a complete body. ובית הלל אומרים חוליה אחת. בית הלל said even it's missing only one vertebra. So it's just one. It's already not considering a full body. So now we said ובגולגולת. How about in the skull? Again, מחלוקת. בית שמאי אומרים כי אם לא מקדח. בית שמאי said it must be missing the piece, the side of the drill hole. And later they explain what does that mean. And then ובית הלל אומרים כדי שינטל מן החי וימות. Which means in a measurement that you take that part of the body from a living person and you make him or her a dead person by taking that part of their body. Tosfot explained to us, allow me just for a second to go to the Tosfot, because the main explanation according to the Shulchan Aruch and Gemara and Bechorot is the size of the sela, which is a small coin. Tosfot here said, he asked a question that there's a many situation that you take part of the body, for example brain part, and still a person's alive, so what exactly involved here? And the key point here, he says that it's depend what part of the body you're taking. He said that usually when you compare human people to animal, human have a much stronger skull than the animals. Anyway, so he said if you take in that size of that small coin, it's called sela, that's the size that like drill hole, that's the size that from a living person he's dead. So we also juxtapose in regard to what? To the treifa, to a kosher animal suffering from a wound or illness that will cause it to die within 12 months, in which is prohibited to be eaten after the required ritual slaughter. It's not a dead body typically, it's just non-kosher. So the minutes they have this something that eventually in the 12 months it caused the animal to die, so it's a treif, it's a treifa, you cannot eat it, even it was slaughtered properly. So if you have an animal that missing the skull or missing the spine, that's already under category of treifa. Why? Now you answer, it's because that animal is not going to survive a period of 12 months. So since you know already the missing spine or the missing skull, even the animal is now alive, it's not going to make it 12 months. So therefore from that point onward, according to the Gemara and Chulin and the Rambam Ilchot Shchita, that animal is no longer kosher, is a treif. So Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel said that's apply also in Yan Treifa, which means by missing part of the body, it's already missing. And now, this machloket that we express between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel is the same way as they have disputation in regard to the corpse, that they have disputation in regard to the treif, which is that by Beit Shammai, an animal that not considering a treif if it's missing some part of the spine, as long as it's less than 2 vertebrae. In other words, if it's exceeded more than 2, that's a different story. But or if it's the skull, if it's the hole in that size, is the size of the drill hole, in the size of the coin, the sela. According to Beit Hillel, is just 1 vertebra missing that is already in a spine is a problem, and the scalp, if you take it from a living person, is going to die. So now, if someone is stringent when it's come to a dead body, according to Beit Shammai, that meaning that if you have a dead body that missing in his spine just one vertebra, so you said it's still considering a contamination if it's under the roof of the tent. And then the same holds stringency when it's come to treif animal, according to Beit Hillel, that if the animal miss only 1 chuliya, 1 vaberna, it's already a problem. So you see here that these 2 stringencies are basically contradicted each other, because if you tell me that 1 missing, 1 vaberna, it's a missing already, is deficiency, so you should be lenient when it's come to a dead body, okay, that it no longer can contaminate in the tent. So, and if you tell me that it's not deficiency, so you should be more lenient when it's come to Ilchot Treifa, so meaning that if you have an animal that's missing 1 vaberna from their spine, so you cannot make it. So therefore the key point is you cannot be stringent in both ways. אבל איכא דלא סתרי עדה דאבדינן. But in a case where there's two stringencies that not contradict one another, we may include act. We go by the stringencies of two authority if needed. So, for example, if you're talking about mavoy akum, if you talk about mavoy, that alleyway that it's going curvely, right? So in that sense, if you don't know if it's the same din as a mefulash or not, so you have these two disputation. According to Nehara, they go by the Rav, that they hold it like mefulash, and according to the Shmuel, that he hold that you have to have doors. However, if it's a real contradiction between the stringencies, so you're going to tell me that we are not contradict one another, we don't go. Mativ Ramesharshia, Maaseh Rabbi Akiva. Here is a story of Rabbi Akiva. Sheliket etrog be'echad b'shvat. You know that we have years, and each year has a different obligation. For those who live in Eretz Israel know it very well, that it's the third year of the sabbatical year, that the way that you count, it's a 6 years, and then you have the Shemitah, the sabbatical year. So the third year, you need to take a part for the Maaser Ani, for the poor, destitute people, and you partake. Basically, a fruit from a land of Israel need to have a tithe. So with that tithe, we go by we explained it several times. You have a Truma Gdola that you give to the Kohen, and then you take 1/10 and you give it Maaser Rishon, and you give it to the Levi, and then you give a part of that. So if you have, for example, the first Truma and the first Maaser, you take part what's left over, 1/10 of that, and you give it to a poor people. So they said, if someone take etrog at the first of Shvat, what is the first of Shvat? You remember the Mishnah in the Tractate Rosh Hashanah? It's a disputation between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai hold the first of Shvat is Rosh Hashanah, and the Beit Hillel said Tu B'Shvat. So someone, what did he do? V'nahag bo shnei isurim. So which means, since he wasn't sure, should I do according to Beit Shammai the first of Shvat, or should I go by Beit Hillel, that is a Tu B'Shvat, the 15th of Shvat? And since he wasn't sure, so the second year you have to do Maaser Sheni, and then you have the Maaser Ani, the third year that you give to a poor. So since he was in a dilemma, he's in predicament, so he did one, Echad, which is Maaser Ani, the tithe for the poor. So what happened is, Kedivrei Beit Shammai, Ve'echad, and then he gave Maaser Sheni, the second one, Kedivrei Beit Hillel. Because Beit Hillel said that the Rosh Hashanah for the trees is Tu B'Shvat. So it means what he collected at the first of Shvat, it's already second year. Okay, so he go by the contradiction by the two, by bringing two different tithe. So it means that he's stringent in both ways. Again, you have 7 years period. The 7 years is a sabbatical year. The second year you bring the second tithe, Maaser Sheni. The third year you give Maaser Ani, the tithe for the poor. If it's the first of Shvat, someone, what did he do? If he go by the Beit Shammai, so he did Maaser Ani. Okay? So why this Maaser Ani? Because according to Beit Shammai, the Rosh Hashanah is the first of Shvat. So therefore, he went ahead for the following year, which is the third year, that the Ani, that you need to give to a poor, a tithe. But the same token, he did according to Beit Hillel, that they said, no, it's not Rosh Hashanah yet, because it's not Tu B'Shvat yet. And since you're dealing today is the first day of Shvat, so if you give a tithe, it's already for the second year Maaser Sheni. So it turns that you are doing lechumra, stringencies, in both parties, and according to Beit Shammai, and according to Beit Hillel as well, even these stringencies are basically contradicted each other. So it means you can you do that, you mix between the tithes. So they said, the respondent said, Rabbi Akiva, Gmarei is typically. Rabbi Akiva is a real quandary. His dilemma was, he doesn't want to be stringent like the way of Beit Shammai and stringent in the Beit Hillel. He did everything according to Beit Hillel because it was clear to him that we go by Beit Hillel. The only problem he was, in a sense, he wasn't sure what Beit Hillel hold in this case. ולא ידע אי בית הלל בחד בשבט תמוז או ב15 בשבט תמוז. It turns, that's the human tendencies of forgetfulness. Did it ever happen to you? You pick up the phone, you call someone, and that fellow said yes, and you stuck, and you don't remember to whom you called. Lehavdil, okay? So here, Rabbi Akiva, he wasn't sure if Beit Hillel hold that the first day of Shvat is Rosh Hashanah Ilanot, or the first day of the trees, or is it Tu B'Shvat, and therefore ve'avad ha'acha lechumra ve'acha lechumra. So since he wasn't sure what Beit Hillel hold, so he hold stringencies in both ways. Okay, so now he brought two tithes. And he wasn't sure what exactly should do. So, in a sense, the Ritva said when we use the term ksil, meaning full, is someone that better study and know it. But sometimes the rabbi said it's not necessarily that case. It's a situation that someone doesn't want to use his own judgment, doesn't want to use his talent or his brain. He just wants to be instructed all the time, to be basically controlled all the times by others, doesn't want to use independent thinking. So in that sense, a critical thinking, meaning understanding the system, understanding the logic of the system, it's a part of the making the final ruling. So therefore that's crucial for him, and the reason he did stringency in both cases, it's because he wasn't, he didn't collected in his best recollection what exactly the view of Beit Hillel, but it's not that he hold others than Beit Hillel. So now we go back to the machloket between Tanakama and Hanania that we mentioned in the previous page. Remember the machloket? Let's refresh our memory to make sure that we're all the same page. This is a public domain. This is a private domain. In order to make it fully private domain, Hanania said on behalf of Beit Shammai, you have to put doors here, and the doors need to be locked. And if you go by the Beit Hillel, it's enough that you make lechi, just post here, and the doors in one side on the back. Now, Yatif Rav Yosef Kamei de Ravuna. Rav Yosef sat before Ravuna in the Beit HaMidrash. V'yativ v'ka'amar, and he sat and he said, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, machloket, Rav Yehuda said name of the Rav, that this disputation between the Tanaim in regard to make a mevo'ot, to make the entrance a kosher, what it's enough to do what? To do tzurat hapetach, to do the cross beam with the two lechis, that's enough to make it kosher. And he said, Bestratya mikan, ustratya mikan, uflatya mikan, uflatya mikan. If you remember when we study Shabbat, so when we talk about stratya, you remember that was the shuk. That was the place that all the merchants selling and buying merchandise, and that's the entrance of the alleyway. So when you have two stratya and two flatya, flatya is like big a place for the market. So he said, and you have in between this type of mavoy, this type in between. So therefore, stratya and platya, it's for sure it's a Reshut Arabim, it's a public domain from the Torah. And the mavoy, he holds that you need to have some type of a door in order to make it accessible. If you remember when we studied Shabbat, page 6, it was a big to-do over that. Now here he said, Aval sratya mikan ubik'a mikan. However, if you have a centerpiece of people, like a merchant, like the shuk, in one place. And you have the other spot, a field, like a very big yard, etc., or large field. So he said, O mikan, o bika mikan, o bika mikan. So if you have, for example, a valley and a field in both sides, so basically what domain is considering? So if you remember when we study Shabbat, page 6, it's considering a Carmelit. You cannot call it fully Reshut Arabim or Reshut Yachid. And what's the din the Carmelit? The prohibition of carrying in Carmelit is the Rabbanan, it's rabbinic. So in that case, now I understand. If that's the case, I do not require him anything but only Tzurat HaPetach and Lechi. I require him in that case just to make Tzurat HaPetach, the cross beams, and the Lechi. Not doors, in that case. Hashta Sratya Mikan Ubika Mikan. But now, when you say that it's in one place is the shuk, is the market, and you have a field in the other side, what do you do? Oseh lo tzurat hapetach mikan, velechi vekora mikan. He does the cross beam in one side, and the post the other. Bika mikan ubika mikan mibaya. So for sure, if you have in both side fields, what's the question? For sure, that it's if in both sides is only Carmelit, why Rav need to say all of that? So he said, Hachi Ke'amar, what Rav meant is when you have an open alleyway, Sratya mikan ubika mikan, if you have in one place the shuk, the place that all the merchant loaded and unloaded merchandise, and the other side is a field, the halachic status change to a field in both sides. So therefore the only needs is in one side you need to have a tzurat hapetach, the crossbeam and the two posts. The other side you need to have only post. And he said, and therefore, the same way as if it's on both sides you have a field, it's enough to have a tzurat hapetach, because what we said the foundation of tzurat hapetach, remember? We talk about heker, that you recognize that that's different, that what?
That it's a separation.
Separation.
Yeah.
So Rav want to imply here that the same way when you have mavoi mefulash, that is come to a field in one side, and is a field in the other, you can make it kosher. You can fix it and make it kosher by putting the tzurat hapetach in both sides. If you do this, cross beam and post in both sides, you fix the problem. And in that sense, is no, even you put the tzurat hapetach in one side and lechi in the other side, as it makes no difference if it's in the side of the stratya or the side of the bika. And you do not have, the Sfat Emet said, you don't have to make it purposely at the place of the Reshut Arabim. So in other words, he said that it doesn't need to be purposely here, it can be there, it can be, in other words, it can be in the place that is close to the field, or the place that's close to Sratya. It doesn't need to be specific there. So after we explained what Rav Yehuda, the name of Rav, said, now we said, Umesayem ba mishmei de Rav Yehuda. So Rav Yosef concluded that statement on the name of Rav Yehuda, and he said, Im mavoi kalel harachava. Look at the picture of the meorot. Rabbi Teichter, thank you, allow us to use this book. So he said here, Im haya mavoi kalel harachava. So Rashi said, Heikef hachatzer shemachorei habayit. This is Reshut Arabim, the public domain. This is the lechi, the post. Here is the alleyway. This is the yard, the rachava. And here is again public domain. So now what happened, you don't need to do anything here. You don't need to put tzurat hapetach. This is not between the alleyway and Reshut Arabim. This is between the mavoi and the rachava. So he said, אם היה מבוי כלל הרחבה, the end of the מבוי ended in רחבה, so Rashi said, אין צריך לתקן אותה פתיחה, you don't need to put anything here, אלא ראש המפולש לרשות הרבים צריך לחי. Only this part that starts with the רשות הרבים, only this one requires to the post. But other than that part, you don't need to have any posts. So אין צריך כלום. So it means that this one doesn't have the din of the chatzer, of the regular yard. Because Rashi explained that we differentiate between something that people use constantly and not. If you look at our homes, in many people they have yard on the back, have a little yard on the front, okay? But the yard on the back, you cannot compare that to just a rachava, a place that you're putting things. It's a yard of the back, so it's two different things. So because the rachava and this one, the people use it all the time. Yard, you have to have the season. For certain purposes you use yard. The rachava, it's used by the people all the time. I'm sorry, opposite. The chatzer using all the time, the rachava using only for certain purposes. So even that it's open to the mavoi, Rashi said, you're still allowed to carry here between the two. You don't need to have a tzuat hapetach here. Ein tzarich klum. You don't need to have any tikkun, any fixing in that entrance. Excuse me. So now Abaye elaborate what Rav Yehuda said, and he said as follows: Amar le Abaye le Rav Yosef. Had Rav Yehuda, what the halacha that you said in the name of Rav Yehuda, and he didn't say from whom he received it, if it's according to Rav, the way that we said earlier, or from Shmuel, you have to admit the Shmuel that he received this from Shmuel and not of his teacher Rav. We just turned to 7b. The Rav, if you're ruling according to Rav, so Kashya de Rav ad Rav betarte, it's appear that the word of Rav contradicted to one another. דאמר רב ירמיה בר אבא אמר רב, מבוי שנפרץ במלואו לחצר, which means this is the alleyway, this is the mavoi, and it was fully open to the chatzer. You see here, this is the borderline. Here it gets to the yard. So he said, "Venifretza chatzer kenegdo," and the yard is come inside the alleyway. So he said, "Chatzer muteret umavoi asur." It's permitted to carry in a courtyard, and is prohibited to carry in an alleyway. Why? Because the alleyway is now open on two opposite sides to a public domain. Public domain, and now this one turned to be a public domain. So now they ask, so basically, since it doesn't have more than 10 amot, it says amai. Why it's prohibited? Leima kemavoi shekalel harechava. You may say that you would judge it like an alleyway that terminates in the backyard. So that's like it terminates here, and it's not a public domain. So therefore, why you say that you not carry there? Amar lei ana lo yadana. He said, I don't know. In accordance with which his teacher of Yehuda issued this ruling. The only thing I know is as follows: Uvda hava bedura de ravata. It was a incident in a city of shepherd. Mavoi shekalel harachava hava, which means that it was a alleyway. That the end of the alleyway come out to this rachava in that city. And he said, "Ve'ata lekamei de Rav Yehuda." So they ask Rav Yehuda, how should we go about in this sense? Since we debate what status this rachava has, so should we put here some heker or not? So he said, ולא יצרך ולא מידי. Rav Yehuda said, don't worry, don't bother with this. So what you see here that they have basically two different machlokot. Number one, if you consider this as a public domain or not, and number two, you ask if it's open toward the yard in full, and you're required to do something. What type of eruvei chatzerot you have to do in this type of circumstances? Not only the tzurat hapetach, it's how you treated the neighbors, the people who live there. So he said, "V'ikashya mishmei de Rav teheve mishmei de Shmuel v'lo kashya midei." So if you have a problem to follow the way of Rav said, like the way the Abaya said, so you have to say the same as according to Shmuel that he received from Rabbi Yehuda. So if it's not the Rav who said it, it's fine. So meaning that according to Abaye, that he is agree with Rav Yosef that the controversy, the dispute between Rav Yehuda and Rav, so hashta de amarav le Rav Shesh le Rav Shmuel bar Abba ve'amre la Rav Yosef bar Abba asber alach. Now I'm going to explain to you the difference. Kan she'ervo, kan shelo ervo. So Rashi here used the word klomar. We're running out of time, but I urge you to read in my book, Biurei klomar berashi. I really elaborate on this Rashi, why he used klomar and what he meant. In very, very short, what Rav said here, that this alleyway is forbidden to carry, it's not always. Sometimes it's forbidden and sometimes it's not. Here is the situation. If you have a people who live in this development, and this development, because if you look carefully at the picture, they have an access to this yard. People in this development, let's call it A, and development B. People in both development have an access to this area. So if both parties join together in shitufei mevoot, which means that they all join together before Shabbat to set it up, so therefore it's not considering mefolash l'rshut harabim, and therefore it's like mavoi satum. You remember what we said, mavoi satum? Mavoi satum meaning, we said earlier, remember? Let's see, mavoi satum, it's like this one, that's black in one side, closed. Yep. So if it's mavoi satum, then it's different status. But if they didn't do it together, if they don't combine the eruv together, so now is the issue. So what we try to say is sometimes that's what they mean kan b'shirvo, kan b'shelo irvo. That it depends if they establish the eruv together or not establish the eruv together. So Rav prohibit to carry in an alleyway because the alleyway now is not residence, which means the resident of the courtyard did not participate in the eruv, and therefore they prevent the residents of the alleyway from carry. The people from development A didn't permit the development B to carry by not participating in the eruv. The Rav name lo kashya. Now the two brighter that looks like contradicted each other, the Rav is also not kasher. And again, you have here Rashi that explaining Kelomar, and I elaborate in the book. Again, I wish to have time, you can see it, but basically what he tried to say, kan shirvu bnei chatzer in bnei mavoi, kan shelo irvu, which means the reason for the prohibition, it's because they didn't join together. It's one family, we just talked about Pesach, right? Mm-hmm. So we said the whole purpose of the Seder, right, is to feel we are all one family. We all one family, meaning we carry a like it or not, he is my brother. And therefore we all have a connectedness to each other. So if they didn't join together, so therefore it's a different story. So the one caused the others. And just let's finish in the 8a, just few lines, because it's the finish of the sugya. ולמאן דסליק הדעתין מעיקרא בין שעירבו, בין שלא עירבו, פליגי. So now, the one, and that will be Mitzvah Shem, part of our discussion tomorrow, we said, with regard to the first entrance in our mind, that Rav and Shmuel disagree both when the resident of the alleyways, you see this entrance to the alleyways from the one resident, okay, and the resident of the yard establish an Eruv together, as well as the case when they did not establish, ben she'irvu ben shelo irvu pligei. And he said, be'irvu mai pligei, b'shelo irvu mai pligei. What exactly they have a disputation in regards to them making an Eruv together or not. B'shelo irvu pligei, benirem b'chutz v'shamim b'fnim. That it's appear close, that they appear close from the outside, but appear even, to be even from inside. And in Mitzvah Shem tomorrow we elaborate on that. Now we go to a practical halachot. First halakha we discussed today, it's a situation of a spine, incomplete spine with regard to impurity. If a spine of a corpse is missing one single chulia, one single vertebra, or if a skull is missing a piece the size of the large coin like sela, they no longer impart ritual impurity to the tent. Rather, the impurity like ordinary bone, that's the opinion of Bet Hillel. Also, they apply to treifot. If the spine of a large animal is missing, one vertebra, or while the rest of the spinal cord is intact, or if the skull is missing a piece of the size of large coin, sela, the animal is considering a treifa, a sick animal. And we explained earlier that treifa, in that sense, if the animal is going to die during the period of 12 months from that damage in their body. We also discussed a mavoi mefulash. Mavoi mefulash is the alleyway. For those, I know that I get for all those emails that there are some people who just watch us the end of halachot. So I want to show again what is mavoi mefulash. Give me a second. Okay. So this is mavoi mefulash. Okay, you see this is the public domain, and this is the alleyway. So he said if the alleyway is open in two opposite ends, and whether they both open into a public domain, or the one side open to a public domain and the other to a Carmelite, or even if both sides open to a Carmelite, that's the Ramah and Beit Yosef said, based on the Rambam, it's permitted to carry in an alleyway if an opening in the form of a doorway is constructed to one end at the side, and a post or crossbeam is placed on the other. So if, for example, we go in that way of Beit Hillel, so you have here the post in one side and the doors on the other side. So then Shulchan Aruch Or HaChaim 364 said you can go ahead and carry. And the last halakha of today, he said that mavoi shenifratz lachaser, if when an alleyway is breached along the entire length of its back wall, where it opens into a courtyard, and the facing wall of the courtyard is breached into a public domain, the residents of the alleyway are permitted to carry within the alleyway, as long as they establish an Eruv together with the resident of the courtyard. If they fail to do so, carrying is permitted in the courtyard, but prohibited in the alleyway. That's the opinion of Rav, and that's Shulchan Aruch Or HaChaim 365.